Hello. I'm going to start by reading you a few verses from the Bible. And it's from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 13. And we're talking about Jesus. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all your seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and perch in its branches. He told them still another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into a large amount of flour until it worked all through the dough. Short and sweet. It's a story. I love stories. I imagine if I were to ask you, you could tell me all about some of your favourite stories. We remember those stories we really like, those often repeated bedtime stories which become known almost word for word as we read them or listen to them night after night. Jesus was an excellent storyteller, and he often told parables. Have you ever thought about what a parable is? I wonder how you would explain a parable. I think a parable is a short story. It usually catches your attention and has some deeper spiritual meaning. Often Jesus told stories which turned things upside down. Those surprising stories often stick in our heads. I'm reminded of this story, one of my favourites, about the Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle. I'm sure lots of you know that story, about the tiny caterpillar that goes through his days chomping and munching his way through all the food until there's a change. There's a transformation. By the end of the book, the hungry caterpillar has been transformed into a beautiful butterfly. Well, I've just read to you Jesus giving us examples of what the kingdom of heaven is like. Can you remember what the images were? They were images of a mustard seed and of some yeast. I wonder what images you might choose to describe the kingdom of heaven. They might not be the same ones that Jesus chose. Well, I'm fairly sure that Jesus surprised his listeners with his words. We might expect the kingdom of heaven, to be majestic and grand. After all, it is a kingdom. We might think of a king with power and authority and riches. However, the way Jesus described the kingdom was very different. Let's consider those images, the images of a mustard seed and some yeast. What do we know about those things? Well, they're very small. On my finger, you can see some tiny seeds. They're not mustard seeds, they're cress seeds. There's 2 of them there, but they're so tiny. And like the caterpillar, mustard seeds and yeast both change. They both start off small, but they both grow, and they have quite an impact. I wonder if you prefer one image to the other, the mustard seed or the yeast. Sometimes we become so familiar with those stories that it loses its shocking impact. Imagine hearing somebody describe the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, as a mustard seed. Something so tiny you could easily drop it and lose it. Or like yeast, an everyday ingredient used in preparing bread. Such a common thing used to make food that we eat all the time. With both the seed and the yeast, they end up unseen in the final product. But they were essential, and their effects are far-reaching. How often do we overlook the insignificant, or what we perceive as unimportant? God can and does use the small, the weak and the ignored to build his kingdom. We matter to God, whether we are young, old, strong, weak, fast or slow. God has a part for us to play. The seed and the yeast both have potential, given the right conditions for growth. Are we willing to let God change us? Do we trust God to work in our lives to help us grow and have an impact on the world around us? I have here another seed. This time it's a sunflower seed. You might see, as you go around the village, you might see some sunflowers like this. We've grown them before, and you might have grown them in your garden too. We can see those and remind us of the story of the parable of the seed, the mustard seed. Let's make sure we don't limit God's kingdom. He has given us potential, and we all have an important part to play in his kingdom. And expect the unexpected. Our God is one of surprises.